right, good afternoon, everyone. So since this is not the first utility committee meeting of the year, we had one in March, but we deferred the election of chair and vice chair. So the election will happen today as our first item on the agenda. So I will turn it over to Corporate Officer Jeremiah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So as set out in the Local Government Act and the Board of Directors Procedure Bylaw, we will now carry out the election of chair for the Utility Systems Committee. Nominations will be called 3 times. As candidates are nominated, they will be asked if they consent to the nomination. Nominations will then be closed. If there is only one consenting candidate, that candidate will be acclaimed as the chair. If there are 2 or more consenting candidates, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to say a few words if they wish before the ballots are distributed. I will now call for nominations for the position of chair. First call for nominations for the office of chair. Oh, do we have somebody online? Director Houghton?
I'd like to nominate Director Grenier, please.
Director Grenier, do you consent to the nomination? Director Hayward, did you have your hand up as well? Second call for nominations for the office of chair. And third call for nominations for the office of chair. There being no further nominations, Director Grenier is acclaimed chair of the Utility Systems Committee. So now I'll call for nominations for the office of vice chair. So once again, if there's only one consenting candidate, the candidate will be acclaimed as vice chair. If there are 2 or more consenting candidates, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to say a few words if they wish before the ballots are distributed. I will now call for nominations for the position of vice chair.
Go ahead, Director.
Director Sal.
I'd like to nominate Director Onslow.
Director Onslow, do you consent to the nomination?
I will pass. Thank you.
Director Grenier.
I would like to nominate Director Houghton.
Director Houghton, do you consent to the nomination?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, second call for nominations for the office of vice chair. And third call for nominations for the office of vice chair. Okay, there being no further nominations, Director Houghton is acclaimed vice chair of the Utility Systems Committee.
Oh, thank you very much. And I guess we'll start with the acknowledgement. We are on the unceded territory of the Tecumseh-Secwepemc, and we appreciate the opportunity to conduct this meeting on their territory. And I guess we have next additions or deletions from the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions? Seeing none, I guess we'll go to the minutes. We have the utility system meeting minutes, March 26. Can I get a motion? Thank you, Director Sal, seconded by Director Thorpe. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. We have some reports, and we start with the capital projects update. Mr. Vieira?
I will turn it over to our manager of utility services, Mr. McCabe, and I'm hoping might start with an explanation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think the explanation he's looking for is why my hair looks a little different than normal. My daughter set some goals at the beginning of the year for swim season and met and exceeded them. So she had her choice of what to do with my hair for I guess however long it takes to grow it out. So I ended up with atomic blue and a barbershop visit on Sunday after she cut it. So, moving on, unless there's any questions on that. I have a capital projects update for the committee. So we'll go through the funding summary, follow our typical format, and then updates, excuse me, on the individual projects, and then discuss some of our future, which are have some funding approved already, but our future projects and the stuff that's coming up shortly. So with our project funding, we have the ICIP. This is our Pritchard Community Water System grant. This was the fully federal funded 100% grant to build a water filtration plant in Pritchard. Then we have our Growing Communities Fund and the CCBF, Canada Community Building Fund, for the conversion of the Pritchard Community wastewater system or sewer plant to a membrane bioreactor. So that's the upgrade of that system. Then we have our Growing Communities Fund and CCBF for a water reservoir in Wallachine. And then we have Canada Community Building Fund for groundwater exploration and test well completion at 4 of our community water systems. So those are our big ticket items, and those are the funding mechanisms for them. We also have some other, they're kind of quasi capital, but we have our Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, disaster risk reduction, for the drought risk and infrastructure sustainability or resiliency assessment for all of our community water systems. So I'll provide an update on that. Then we also have 2 infrastructure planning grants that we received. One was for the feasibility of a bottled water fill station in Loon Lake, and the other one is for the feasibility study to convert to groundwater in Evergreen. And these 3 kind of all tie in together. There's some overlap on those as well. So this is a table that we present with the total amount of funding that we have. So it all adds up to about, right now, approximately $10.4 million worth of projects ongoing that have a secured and approved funding. So they're just a table for the minutes later on and easy review. So getting to our current projects and the status. So this one's pretty cool. Our Pritchard water plant, this has been, seems now like it's been going on for quite a while. We have awarded the construction contract back in October 2024, I believe the day after our committee meeting there. The equipment and the contractor mobilized to site. The clear well was poured and the footings are scheduled for this week. So these are some pictures I took last week up there. I'll just highlight this. This is the clear well. So this is where the water, treated water from the membranes will be stored and circulated, and then the pumps will sit above it and pump them up to the reservoir. This area here shows the entire footprint. This picture on the bottom left shows the larger footprint of the actual water facility itself. And the mechanical contractor was just working on the underslab piping and the drain there. So the footings will go in, and the next time we meet, we'll have some, shove a building up and a roof on and some mechanical and HVAC in there if we don't have the taps running yet. So pretty excited to see the earthworks and the concrete in the ground on this in progress. It's one thing to design and meet and review and plan, but then when you actually see the equipment out there digging and the concrete and the structure starting to come together, it's pretty exciting. So pretty good opportunity for Pritchard. The wastewater plant. So we've secured the equipment, so the membranes for the wastewater plant, as well as all the auxiliary equipment like blowers, aeration equipment, whatnot. We have, because it's an existing facility, this wastewater plant that was built in 96, 97 by the TNRD, we have to figure out how to maintain an operating wastewater treatment facility and build a new one with it, while using as much of the existing infrastructure as possible. So that's what I mean when I say design and construction staging of this project. We're currently developing the tender package for this to go seek a general contractor to do the work. And so we have a pretty decent drawing set of how the staging is going to be, and I wanted to put bits and pieces up here for you to see. So this is our existing wastewater treatment facility with our far bottom right is our headworks building, the newest piece of this. All the raw wastewater comes in here, goes into a couple tanks, flows through into the existing trickling filter, and then to a clarifier where the solids settle and the liquid goes out, and then gets pumped out to the RI basins further on the property. So these purple lines here are aeration headers. So we're taking all these non-aerated tanks and starting to aerate them or add air, which allows the biological activity to start. So this plant has to run while this equipment is installed. There are some restrictions on what we can and can't do to the structures that are existing because of the changes in the building code and whatnot. So lots of details we maybe don't need to get into, but it's very interesting from an operator and owner point of view to see how we're going to do this. So one of the things is we're going to add in phase one is add a little pump station that these two equalization tanks will feed into, and this pump station will then feed our new membrane bioreactors, so the new treatment process. Just adjacent to this building, we're going to build a new aeration tank as well as the two membrane chambers. So we will have redundancy. So we'll essentially have two separate treatment facilities, membrane facilities. One can be turned off for servicing and maintenance. And it's also required under the wastewater regulations for redundancy. So this will be just adjacent to it. So when you drive into the building, there'll be a water plant when you drive into the property, and then there's going to be a sewer plant beside it. And then on the further over east, we will have a covered aeration chamber with the membrane bioreactors. So this is stage one. Pour some new tanks outside, put some membranes in there, put a little pump station in, start redirecting wastewater, keeping the existing trickling filter operational, add some mechanical works for aeration. And then at the end of the day, what we'll have is that existing aeration train plus the membranes outside. And then we'll also take the trickling filter that was in here, remove this, fill in where the clarifier was, and this will become the second aeration chamber. So we're reusing that entire structure that already exists there. And then we are revamping. This was a fun one because we have a pretty rundown bathroom in a wastewater plant, which makes sense to put one in a sewer plant. It's right at the source, right? But as close as you can get. But it's from, mid-90s, and it hasn't seen a lot of maintenance over time. So we're actually going to convert that and move our electrical over into this blower room. This tank will also be filled in and supported, and we'll be able to support the blowers and the equipment in there and the electrical. So we'll be tidying all that up. This will now be bathroom with a little bit of storage, and we'll have a little lab bench and some storage outside. So when you walk in here through one of the double doors, you will have basically a mechanical and electrical area, and then we'll have an enclosed aeration tank. So this allows us to make stuff a little bit safer from the electrical point of view, as well as keep the building a little bit, protect the building a bit more with the ventilation. So all the humidity and stuff from the wastewater in an open tank will actually be in a separate room inside this building. So it's pretty exciting, and we actually spent most of a day out there trying to figure out how we're going to sequence this because of the electrical requirements and the electrical contractor and designer. How much space do they actually need, and where do we need to put it all? So yeah, we're expecting to tender this sometime this summer and get going on this before the water plant wraps up. So moving on to the Wallachine Reservoir. So we finished the design for this reservoir, and we've submitted it to Interior Health for a construction permit. Yes.
Tyrone, I just wanted to ask a question on the last
Sure.
building, if I could. So we have that emergency power source, if we have a power failure, what do we have for this new facility? And then the second is the aeration of the indoor areas, given that it's a sanitation facility, if you could talk about the air handling on the inside and what that might mean for exhaust as well. Odor, I guess, is the issue.
Okay, thank you. So the first one is the standby power. So, I can't remember when we did this, but a couple of years ago now, Trans Mountain donated a generator to the Blue River Community Water System. And we swapped that. The generator was oversized. We swapped that with the Pritchard Community wastewater system generator. So the generator that we now have in Pritchard is actually large enough to operate both the water system and the wastewater system. And that is all in the design with the water treatment facility. The existing wastewater plant has a transfer switch and that generator is hooked up to it. So that generator currently provides standby power to this wastewater plant. So when both projects are complete, one standby generator will run the water intake, the water treatment facility, and the wastewater treatment facility. And then we have an existing standby generator at the lift station for the wastewater, for the raw wastewater. So both water and sewer systems in Pritchard have backup power when we're all said and done. As far as the air handling goes, so the existing plant, actually, back up one more slide. This trickling filter is an open air in this room with wastewater. Essentially, the trickling filter is like a plastic media, like picture a honeycomb, and then it has the spray nozzles over top of it. And that takes the raw wastewater and sprinkles it over top of this trickling filter. And it's not a sprinkle, it's a spray. And it sprays everywhere in this building right now. And so we do have an exhaust system in here where the air draws in through a louver. The intake is over right here, draws air in through this way and exhausts out the back of the building here into an odor controlled bed. That is going to stay, that existing system for odor control is going to stay. And the addition is this, we're reducing the amount of open to atmosphere liquid, basically. So this entire aeration tank that has the liquid in it is in a separate room. So the air will flow in still through this louver and then through an additional one in the interior wall and then across this room and out. So it'll bring the dry air in from the mechanical and electrical areas and then across through the moisture laden area and then out through the odor control bed that way. So does that answer your question? Thank you. All right. Washington Reservoir, and I guess I should have mentioned, feel free to ask questions as I go through each project. It's probably easier than going back at the end. So we've asked.
We do have a question from Director Morris. Otherly.
I'll defer to the other Lee. No. Just a few questions, but an easy one, I guess, right now is from the community perspective, as they're starting to see change maybe on the surface or whatever and growing, are we communicating with the residents of Pritchard in some sort of a regular fashion that keeps them aware and somehow engaged in this process? I'm wondering, what sparked my thought was this exhaust fan that's up on the left-hand side facing east, I assume. But in any case, just overall, what the community communication might be or need to be.
Yeah, so we haven't had a lot of communication on this project since announcing it in the latest newsletter. We do have a newsletter going out for the summer of 2025, so that should be out mid-July. And this project will be the bulk of that, as well as an update on our regulatory management bylaw. So the update on that, and that exhaust fan, just a minor correction, is actually facing north, where it actually already exists. So there's actually, it'd probably be less odor coming out of that. the new system than the existing system, because aerated systems tend to have less odor and less hydrogen sulfide production and whatnot, so. All right, on to the Wallachine Reservoir again. So we've done the design on this, and we've issued it to sent the drawings to Interior Health Authority for waterworks construction permit. And so we're working through some other permits right now. One of them being the ALR piece that this property is on. And then we need some Ministry of Transportation permits as well for a little bit of the works that'll be on their right of ways. So we anticipate tendering this in the fall 2025. One of the reasons it is pretty much ready to tender right now, but our consultant feels that we'll get better value, better responses, more, I guess, cost-effective responses in the fall, as they have a feel that the construction industry is fairly busy out there right now with other projects. So we're looking at tendering this fall, and then potentially having it up and running for spring 2026.
If I can jump in, Tyrone, I'll give a quick update on the ALC application. So it just went to the TNRD Agriculture Advisory Committee yesterday, who supported the application for non-farm use for this purpose. So that means the board will see that same recommendation come forward in the July meeting to move that forward, which is required for then the ALC to get in line for that process.
So this basically is a general site plan of the proposed reservoir, and all of Wallachine is in the ALR, so that's fun. So this is essentially a city-sized lot that's owned by the TNRD. We actually own both of these properties here. Our existing treatment filtration building is right down here at the end of Barclay Street. So we have the driveway coming in. This will be fenced area, and then the reservoir and 3 additional rooms attached to it, which will house, I'll cover on the next slide here, I guess. So this is when you are looking east at the building. This is what you'll see from the road. And so the lower left picture is just the elevation from the eastern side, or facing east. So you have 3 doors, and then the reservoir behind it. The reservoir is going to be a poured concrete structure, most likely. And then we have our safety railings and access for above, so we can access the reservoir. And then we have these 3 rooms attached over here. So we have our pump room. I think I'm lost that there. We have our pump room here, and our chlorination room here, and our electrical room here. So essentially, we're going to leave the filtration in the existing filtration room, our building, and we're going to take the chlorination and add a pump skid for pressure control for the system into the pump room. And then the electrical, the main controls and control panel will all move into the electrical room for this. As part of this project, we're also adding a EV charger outside, and we are also adding a backup generator. So as part of this project, one of the big, I guess, fundamental changes of the way this system will operate is that we no longer will rely on gravity to provide the system pressure. We will rely on the gravity with the existing reservoir to provide the driving force through the filtration system, and then through the UV, and then into this reservoir. So now we'll take the raw water, treat it, and store it. Right now, we currently take raw water, store it, and then treat it on demand. I think you guys have heard me talk about that plenty of times. It's like an on-demand water heater, but it's a lot more difficult for 40 connections and irrigation. With that being said, we need to put in a booster skid in here in order to maintain pressure in the system so that when you open up the tap, water flows. And if the power goes out and those boosters don't run, well, no one has water, which is what happens right now when our filters foul up. So we don't want to trade a filter plugged filter issue for a power outage issue and have no water. So we'll have backup power here as well to operate this and maintain system pressure and provide that redundancy to the system and the residents. Part of this also, budget dependent is going to be to add UV. And the ultraviolet disinfection will allow the entire system to meet the the IHA 43210 guidelines. So that would be, if we can squeeze that into our existing budget, we will remove this system from our list of non-conforming, non-complying water systems. So there's an added bonus there, as well as operationally, constant rate filtration is much easier to manage and handle on a part-time basis than a varying flow. Yeah, and so that basically means staff time. So right now, this time of year with freshet and water quality issues, we're out there 3 times a week. And where we should probably be out there at max twice a week, and in the wintertime, probably once to do our checks and stuff. It should be a lot more operator friendly and less intensive, less labor intensive operation, allowing us to focus on the other issues in the water system. So just because we put in, nice shiny new stuff and make our jobs easier on that piece doesn't mean that we have any less work to do on the underground infrastructure and all the other pieces that get deferred while we focus on filtration. So any questions on that one? Director Thorpe, I knew there would be.
You knew I'd ask. Sorry, thank you. Couple quick questions, because I was actually out in Wallachine on Sunday meeting with residents. Concrete, thank you. Do we know the size of the reservoir? And I think somebody told me once and I couldn't regularly, quickly grab it.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm going to give you a list of questions and it's okay to do homework.
Yep.
So size of reservoir, if you don't mind. Residents had noticed PSI changes in the past year, and I'm assuming this is from clogging, et cetera, but they wondered if something had happened to the system that had decreased the PSI.
No, the changes, the fluctuating pressure is a result of the
Fluctuating.
filters. Yes.
Filters. Let me see. They also mentioned, and this is slightly off that they see people testing the second to last house. There's a spigot at the second to last house. Like when you come into Wallachine, it would be the second house in. And they were wondering why we're doing the second to last house, not the last house, if it's a closed system.
Yeah, so we have a sample port
Mhm.
right there, and that's where our designated sampling point is for that system. And it's at essentially the last customer. We don't go to the house itself and do it. That's the last point right before
Because
the
there's
connection.
one customer past that. That's why they were asking.
Right, there's one customer past that sample port, but their services are tied in very close
It's
to each
tied.
other. So it's all, we don't sample from the home, we sample from the distribution main.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I'll just tell them it's tied in. Last question, and I don't think this is going to happen, is they were talking about looping back the system, and I know we don't have the funding for that, but they were saying something about the system potentially being better if it was looped back in.
So the looping of a water system is always beneficial for hydraulics as well as for maintenance and redundancy and resiliency. There were options presented to the community many years ago
Mhm.
for projects to loop the system and service some of the unserviced lots that are within the service area. And none of those were accepted. So unless they choose to or put forward something to, I guess, ask for looping in those projects, then it's not on our list of things to do.
Okay, perfect. I had the right answer then. Okay, I think that was it. Thank you.
Let's talk about climate change now. Our drought response plan, we received an interim report about 10 days ago. I've read the 50 or 26 or 56 pages of it. I don't know, it's hard to keep track. So I'm familiar with it, but if you ask me lots of hard questions, I'm going to have to get back to you on those. Basically, we're looking at the climate change impact and analysis for stream flows and groundwater flows. So both our surface water and our groundwater systems. And then the consultants, the hydrogeologists, and there's so many different terms for all these guys that study water and water flows. Looked at the low water levels and the anticipated low water levels and the modeled and forecasted low water levels and used different climate change models and you say models and models and models and models and models of what's going to happen to the South Thompson River, North Thompson River, Thompson River, the different aquifers that we are in for our groundwater systems, and how that's going to impact our intakes and our current wells. So they looked at aquifer recharge rates. So that's how quickly does the groundwater aquifer recharge? So what can you pump out of it? And then low water levels, our intake, for instance, in Del Oro community, if the Thompson River drops a meter, what's that mean for accessing water from our existing intake? And so that's where we are with the report right now. The modeling is and the forecasting and those results are done. And now it's what do we do? And what other information do we need? So we've done that. That work, the interim results are there and some recommendations. So I mean, one of the easy ones, I say this easy because it's not overly expensive, although every dollar is expensive for every community water system. But monitoring our intake levels and our well water levels. So the majority of our groundwater wells have well level monitoring in them that are tied into our SCADA system and recorded and historized. We don't have any online monitoring for the surface water intakes, localized ones. So we can rely on the provincial mapping for that and monitoring for that. So that's one of the recommendations is for us to get some actual some more data basically on what the South Thompson at Del Oro is doing and what it's doing in Pritchard and what's it doing in Wallachine, those kind of things. And then some bathymetric mapping around the Vavenby intake. There's very low mapping or not a lot of information around that intake in Vavenby itself. A lot of the watershed around Kamloops and the Thompsons has been fairly well mapped and looked at for drought and for flooding by the province and other organizations. So there's lots of information there, but we do lack the data around Vavenby. So one of the recommendations is to do some more bathymetric mapping there and see what how that intake relates to the mainstream flows, just to refine that forecast a bit. One of the interesting results, and I think I mentioned this in the my last presentation on this, is that climate change doesn't necessarily increase our risk for surface water. And this goes to the whole idea that the spring melts will start earlier. So, and they will start to overlap our low water levels that typically happen in the winter as everything dries up over the summer and the stream flows start to deplete and drop off. Our melts are going to start happening earlier. So instead of having these larger peaks and valleys, we'll start to see more consistent water levels overall in our surface water sources. So that was one of the interesting things we actually found in the first month or two of this project. It was kind of exciting to see and kind of interesting, like none of us really expected this. Our guts all said like we're going to be hooped when with the drought and whatnot. So turns out that may not be the case overall. And then we do have a couple higher risk groundwater sources where redundancy is key and resiliency for these systems. And this is all summarized in these next two tables. And there's a lot of information in these tables, and I actually removed a couple of columns from the reports that just clutter it up, and a bunch of other information, like a 7Q200 minus 10% water level. So that's the forecasted model that they used. And then they added a safety factor of let's take 10% less than that for our elevation of the water at the surface water intakes. So I've highlighted these two systems. So they even be the susceptibility to drought, it's moderate high. The pump elevation comment is that the pump elevation is the limiting factor. So what's the stream flow do and how much water is over top of that pump and that intake? So the pumps sit in the in a well beside the North Thompson River, and there's a direct pipe to the river that feeds water into there. So the more water over top of that pipe, the higher driving force you have to push water into that well. As the elevation of the North Thompson decreases, there's less pressure pushing the water into that well. That's where the bathymetric mapping comes in to determine, to basically refine that susceptibility risk. So minimum level above the intake pump. This is the important one for us as in operations as well. How much water is going to be over top of our pump in the system right now? If we look at the model for 200-year 10% minus 10% out for these systems. So Del Oro, I keep mentioning this one because it's a negative number. So worst case, maybe not even worst case scenario, but the forecasted scenario is that our water in Del Oro is our pump in Del Oro is not going to be in the water. And so there's options for these things, right? All this information in this report can drive more structural projects, which there's grant funding available for. And part of this DRIF and CEPF piece is that the study and the modeling and stuff is the first step to identify the issue. So essentially what we're doing with this is saying, okay, as operators out in the field, we know that there's a risk here, and we're doing these studies to actually quantify that and qualify it, rather than Tyrone saying, I have a gut feel that we're going to be low on water in Del Oro, and we should probably do this project because of this, because that's how I feel about it. So this is actually looking at the data, qualifying it and quantifying it, and it turns out wasn't wrong. But it gives us something to go off of, right? And to drive more projects and inform more decisions. So yeah, this is basically where we're at with our surface water sources. Savannah, not a big surprise, not susceptible to drought. I mean, we're in the Kamloops Lake there, whether we're 16 meters down or 25 meters down. Not anticipated to be a dry intake in the next couple hundred years anyways. And then, yeah, the other ones are all low as well. And Pritchard, being on the South Thompson, similar to Del Oro, has a low risk as well. And that data is pretty fresh in our minds from our project there. Then we have our groundwater system. So Black Pines, I mean, brand new for all intents and purposes of the TNRD days, I guess, brand new groundwater system. No susceptibility to drought. This is a well contained, confined aquifer. And then in Blue River as well. It's an unconfined aquifer. And it's, we installed these things in the mid-90s again. But if we look at our current source capacity and then 1,900 cubic meters per day of our source in Blue River, and then our recent max day demand. So our absolute maximum that we pumped out of that in one day, and that could be 2 pump cycles, not necessarily the daily use of the community, but could just be the way that the cycles fell with the data. But are we sufficient for demand? And fortunately for us, with our groundwater systems, the answer is yes for all of these. So with our recent max day demands and our capacities, on our groundwater sources, we're in pretty good shape as far as meeting the current demand of the systems. And fortunately, a conversation I had before the meeting started about water metering is that, you know, it really drives conservation and also gives us a fair bit of insight into the community use of water. So we have quite a few options to maintain that green column of sufficient for demand. The issues we run into with our groundwater are in Spence's Bridge and Maple Mission, where we have unconfined aquifers. They're a little bit older, and they're more susceptible to drought. So it's just the way the hydrogeology is with these systems. And I'll talk a bit more about these with our next project, the groundwater exploration, which is the gut feel is to do projects like this. And it turns out, well, a report showed up after we decided to do it that said, yeah, actually you're on the right track. So, but this is what this report, these are the interim results. And when this report is complete, later this fall, early winter, then we'll have it published as well and presented in more detail. So any questions on that before we move on?
Thank you for that presentation. I have a question about water licensing and priorities. I understand that there's in the irrigation world, there's first come, first serve, early licenses, that sort of thing in the agricultural world. And I understand that domestic supply is not impacted by that, but we're running a municipal system. So I wonder if you could comment on that, both for well water and for surface water, in terms of our licensing and our priorities, whether somebody would come along and say, hey, I got to irrigate my field, or the fisheries comes along and says, hey, you got to stop pumping water. Are we susceptible to any of that?
I think the short answer to that is we will always be susceptible to that as long as people are using water. The province does do surveys of all the water purveyors, us included, of our water use and our consumption. We report annually how much water we withdraw from whichever license we have for all the communities. And we are licensed, all of our water licenses, the capacities exceed the actual use. So we technically aren't allowed to exceed or withdraw more than what we're licensed to use. And then in the case of Black Pines, which we recently licensed, as far as priority goes, its priority date's 2020. However, we are the first user in that aquifer. So you know, there's no 1912 precedent dates or priority dates in that aquifer. And in conversations with the province about that, community water systems are a priority for when they get into the drought responses and stuff, which this program will also inform is what is our drought response going to be. So when you see, I mean, driving around the city of Kamloops, you can see the signs out there with drought level 0 to 3, right? Basically green, yellow, red. And those do apply to us. However, we are literally a drop in the bucket compared to most water users and municipalities out there. You know, there's, yeah, our systems with 40 connections on average 100 connections per system. They're minuscule, the amount of water that we use compared to other users out there. So I wouldn't say that we will, you know, realistically, we're going to have a drought response plan that's going to be driven by the province's guidelines that they give us, and they will contact the water purveyors and the licensees in those areas and say, look, this system, for instance, Spence's Bridge, this aquifer is being depleted. We need you to reduce demand by 20%. And then we go to our conservation plan and our strategy and go from there. So that's about where we're at with those.
And just to follow up to that, we saw in Director Houghton's area where fisheries prompted a request to reduce irrigation water in favor of fish habitat. Do we have the same thing for our stream source water systems, or do humans rank the same as fish, or fish ahead of humans, that kind of thing?
So the ranking would be a question for the province. That's not my determination or our determination to make. If the province will reach out to us if they need us to reduce water consumption, and we haven't had that happen yet. So whether they target agriculture first or community water systems first, I don't know. That's a question for the province. So-
I think Director Houghton had a question
Oh.
online as well, Chair.
Director Houghton, are you there? Oh,
All right, so just to finish off our project updates here, the infrastructure planning grant for both for Loon Lake is complete. That resulted in a design as well as actually a construction permit for a bottled water fill station there. And then our infrastructure planning grant for a feasibility study to convert Evergreen to groundwater from surface water is actually overlapping with it's in progress right now. I'll have a site visit tomorrow. It overlaps with our next project here, so. Groundwater exploration, this one we mentioned in the March meeting. So this is funded by our Canada Community Building Fund, so there's zero impact on user fees and taxation. It's fully funded by the gas tax. We're going to look for groundwater in 4 systems. So Del Oro and Evergreen currently are on surface water. So South Thompson and North Thompson River. Evergreen can be argued whether it's groundwater or surface water, but it's adjacent to the North Thompson River and influenced by it. So we'll look at options for these 2 systems for converting from surface to groundwater. The Maple Mission and Spence's Bridge systems were identified in our drought response or in our drift and resiliency plan as being higher hazard or higher risk and susceptibility to drought. So I believe my next slides cover those ones a bit more in detail. This project is basically going to take it in 2 steps. So first step is to do a desktop study. And this is an expanded study that we have started in Evergreen. This is, the hydrogeologists going out there, identifying existing wells. In the case of Evergreen, we've worked with the owner of a well within the community water system to actually do a pump test on it to determine yield and quality of water on that well to further identify an area that's suitable for the community to drill a well in. So the first step is to see, okay, is there a spot in Del Oro that will provide water in Spence's Bridge that will, has a good chance of succeeding in intercepting an aquifer? The second step of this phase, the answer is not going to be yes or no for the first phase. It's going to be there's a 60% probability of accessing groundwater from this location. The second step is to get the drillers out there and drill and develop a test well. So what this project doesn't do is connect those wells to the community water systems. What it will do, if the desktop study says, yes, you can intercept groundwater, and there's a good chance of that. And then step 2 intercepts that groundwater, and it's adequate for drinking. What it does is it gives us what Black Pines had for a few years, which is a well that's sitting there that's productive, that we can then design any additional treatment if required. The end goal would be no additional treatment required, just some chlorination and add it to the system and convert the surface water to groundwater. So the next step of this, if this doesn't cover, would be then the infrastructure project to connect it to the community water system. So in Del Oro, this is our first kick at it, really. We've in the properties, the sections highlighted in red, kind of the areas we identified that might be suitable for, where we can have a reasonable idea that we could probably access those areas and drill some wells. So the one on the north of this picture is actually a park owned by the TNRD parcel, which I like using properties that we own so we don't have to buy anything else. Doesn't cost the community water users any additional money to access that property. But the current intake is right here, and there's the South Thompson and the intake, and then it comes across to the community here. So this park, not very far down Whitner Road, from a desktop or overhead, 10,000-foot point of view, it's pretty reasonable to expect to be able to put a well there and tie it into the existing system without costing an arm and a leg and a haircut. The other area is that these owners, these properties along the frontage road here, these are undeveloped and they're pastures, fields, or unirrigated now. So maybe we can negotiate with the landowner if one of these areas is identified. And this is our main pumping line here to our reservoir. So anywhere along here, we could, a reasonable chance or opportunity to intercept groundwater perhaps. And anyways, these are where we're going to focus in Del Oro on this program.
Excuse me, Tyrone.
Yes.
On that last slide, the ones on the north, are they not on the water system?
They are not. That's a private water system. I believe it's called Keekwillie. You're referring to these areas up here. So that whole section is on its own private water system, which actually has their intake and pump house right here beside us.
Is there any opportunity to work with those people together or?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start with it. So I guess I'll start with this. Typically, if we don't hear from communities wanting to partner with us, wanting help, it means they're probably happy with leaving things the way they are. But I think it's worth the discussion if, for example, we find a great water source and want to develop a well in the Keekwillie Park there. At that point, we'd probably reach out to them. Right now, this is kind of all hypothetical, so it's a little ahead of the game. But it's definitely an option that's on the table that we'll explore depending on what we find here. Right now, there'd be no benefit to them of joining the water system, but generally speaking, as we've talked about with a lot of our advocacy to the province, and one of their recommendations back is to look for opportunities to have more users connected to the system, more people paying into the system generally is better. So this is one opportunity that we see.
Is that system, that private system, older or newer than our system?
We don't have much data on it. I would guess it's probably similar age. That was something we'd have to dig into, looking at building records, things like that. But we haven't been in contact at all with the operator owner of that system. It's a private system. And just for interest's sake, the South Thompson has many of these small private systems, some of them being 3 or 4 homes connected to it, and it's just the volunteer group of people who go and maintain it at an extremely low cost. And so, yeah, they're all different stages of sort of development and operational, or how they operate them, I should say.
All right, so up here we have the Evergreen and the Maple Mission systems. So on the Evergreen system, the picture on the left, we have 3 red circles drawn there. The southernmost one is an existing well on the southernmost property in the community water system. That's the well that we're going to be checking out tomorrow, as well as performing a pump test on this next few weeks anyways. So if you look at these, there's these light blue lines here that show these essentially through these gullies that separate and split out this community. This circle up here, this property owner has another building up on this piece here in a fairly large gully that separates, basically splits their parcel in 2. We've been discussing in discussions with them about exploring, an area up here. The idea is that maybe these gullies separate some groundwater from the rest of the area, which is why there's no other wells in this piece. So that's what we're going to look at. And then the other one that was just mentioned when I was talking to our hydrogeologist yesterday was this well is right here. We can save ourselves 60 to 70 feet of drilling if we can tap into that same aquifer down here. And then we'd be able to answer your question, Director Gagne, about who has precedence, whether it's a irrigation well or a community water system well. If we put one in after the irrigation one's in, then we'd answer that question pretty fast. So Maple Mission up here, Maple Mission's the biggest difference between Maple Mission and the rest of our community water systems is that there's a covenant on all the properties that prohibits wells. So we have a well for the community water system here, and this goes back to the original developer days when they had to provide proof of water and they had to put a water system in for the community in order to subdivide these properties and these parcels. So we have one well there, excuse me, that was put in 96, 93 to 96, somewhere in there. A lot of this stuff is mid-90s now. And we have one well that provides water to 24 service properties at the moment. There's, again, on our drought resiliency study, there is susceptibility here. And most of that's driven by the fact that this is an aging well and it's a fairly limited aquifer. And it's not necessarily an idea of putting a second straw in the same cup. It's more of finding a new bowl of water and putting a straw in it in order to provide some redundancy and resiliency to the system for drought. So this is mainly fed by the upper mountains, and it does fluctuate. The groundwater levels that we monitor there do fluctuate seasonally. Essentially with freshet. So as the snow melts, the groundwater levels increase, and then they start to taper off over the winter. To the point where we have a few feet of water over top of the pump instead of 20 or 30 feet of water over top. So yeah, we're looking at adding an additional well there for some resiliency. And then Spence's Bridge. So this one is also unique to the TNRD in that it's a shared use system. So both the TNRD and Cooks Ferry Indian Band own the infrastructure separately in this system. So the area circled in green is where our existing groundwater source is. That's owned by the Cooks Ferry Indian Band. The north, essentially, from there, we pump to both the IR1 reservoir as well as the Spence's Bridge Community Water System reservoir. Off of the Spence's Bridge Community Water System, we also feed, I think, 6 or 7 other IRs, Cooks Ferry properties. And so, you basically can't have one without the other here. But we have 3 wells in this green area, all tapped into the same aquifer, slightly deeper as you head away from the river. And so we're looking at the impact that the river, both the Nicola and the Thompson, have on the aquifer here. And then the areas highlighted in red, one being the school, the western end of Spence's Bridge there is the old school property, the improvement district area. And then the eastern side is where there's currently a campground, and I believe we set up a temporary transfer station when Highway 8 washed out. So those are 2 areas that we are looking at. They're both near the Thompson River and potentially influenced by that versus the Nicola, and gives us some resiliency in that we're not so dependent on the Nicola-Thompson confluence for groundwater, and we don't have 3 pumps in one aquifer to satisfy demand. We can maybe access an additional or a second aquifer to provide that resiliency there. And that's what our groundwater exploration program is looking like right now for those 4 systems. So desktop study, chances of of intercepting groundwater and then drilling test wells and seeing what the water quality is like and can we drink it.
Director Thor.
Almost across the street from that campground, we own a tiny piece of parkland. It's called, it's Chucker, I think, or something,
Okay.
just as a heads up. And I know that when you look at that map, you see the alluvial fan that comes down there? That well, the W, there's a well there, and he has a significant amount of water, he tells me. And that again is almost across the highway. See where I'm looking at?
Almost across the highway.
See.
Yes, I know which property
you
you're
s-
speaking of.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting individual.
Yes.
Yeah, he has 2 wells over there.
I'll let you describe them.
But just a thought.
Yes, so we are aware, and that's part of the desktop study is to look at the existing wells there, which are licensed. There's another one just beside adjacent where the green parcel is on the north end there. They're irrigation wells and they are recorded as well. So that's what our hydrogeologists will look at is how productive these wells are and where we can reasonably expect to intercept water.
Yeah, because when we get a significant rainfall, it comes down and it kind of floods along the frontage road there a little bit. So there's water in the area.
There's definitely water in the area. It's how long is it going to be there and
Yeah.
how much? So that's basically what we're trying to do is how much water is there? Is it there year round or not? And just we're trying to build redundancy and resiliency for these systems. So yeah, that's it for that. So now we did the infrastructure planning grant for the bottled water fill station in Loon Lake, which was intended to look at the feasibility of adding a bottled water fill station here. And it quickly became apparent that it was feasible to do it. And we ended up with design drawings and a cost estimate. And we already have a construction permit from Interior Health to build this. So those, if you guys aren't familiar, those planning grants are $5,000 from the TNRD and up to $10,000 to a maximum of $10,000 from the province for a $15,000 project. And we ended up with design drawings, cost estimate, and a construction permit. So I think we did fairly well, got a lot of bang for our buck out of that one. This is just the general site plan. So our Loon Lake Community Water System intake is right here, draws from Loon Lake through a little gravel infiltration bed, pumps all the way up to the reservoir through a right of way. This is a TNRD, another TNRD owned property. We basically just look at a map and say, what do we own? What can we put there? So I know that there's potentially some overlap with some other departments' projects and works for this, but one of the things is we have a service to this lot already. So we're essentially looking at adding a small parking area and then a little essentially 10 by 10 building. Maybe it's 8 by 12, not entirely sure yet. The dimensions don't really matter, but it's a fairly small outbuilding or accessory building to this parcel that residents can come up to with a swipe card similar to the Eco Depots and dispense potable water into their 5-gallon buckets or jugs, put them in their water dispensers at home, wash their veggies, do their, have their drinking water, rather than having to drive down to Cache Creek or the nearest fill station to get potable water. So being a seasonal community with, 1 or 2 permanent residents out of the 50 service lots, it's for a couple $100,000, we can provide potable water for the seasonal users versus, a multi-million-dollar project to provide potable water out of the taps that is primarily used for keeping areas green for fire protection and fire smarting. So we will continue to operate the system. The source for this bottled water fill station will be the existing community water system. And then I think I have this. Yeah, we'll essentially bring the water into this building and we will filter it and treat it to drinking water standards and then dispense it. As you can see in the drawing on the left, essentially you pull up to it, this will be a concrete riser with a grate on it where you can put your bottle and then have a faucet above it. So any spillage goes to a dry pit there and drains out. And that's how this system will work. So I missed a couple of points, but our next steps are to secure funding. So we'll have to bring a report to the board for funding for this. And then we will procure the equipment and the contractor to start constructing this once we have the funding secured. So I know I call this a future project. It's a very, very near future, assuming, shouldn't assume, but if the board approves the funding for it, it's
Just have a
Right
question
here.
about how do we vandal-proof a tap that's turned open?
right. So on the interior of the building, we will have we'll have a double check valve to protect the water system, but we will also have solenoid valves that will activate. So all the operations of the system will occur inside the building, the secure building, and only a faucet will be available on the outside, and that's essentially a pipe. So that will fill up the jug. There won't be a tap or anything on the outside. And what will happen is the card reader will activate the solenoid, and then this is still in development, this piece, but the idea is that the card reader will activate the one solenoid to allow the system to push water out. And then the user will press a button that will activate the second solenoid valve, which will then actually cause the faucet to dispense water. We can meter it, and so that the first solenoid that's activated by the card is only active for X amount of time to prevent someone from standing there, and just having fun and holding the water and kids from playing in it and whatever. So those are the kind of details we're still working on, and we'll deal with that with the equipment procurement piece. So, and that is the end of the capital projects update.
Any questions? Thank you very much for that presentation. No questions? And Mr. Houghton's not online now, so is he off? Okay. Okay, I guess, do we move on to the next item? Oh, my screen's updating, so I'm not sure what the next item is because I can't see it.
We'll turn it over to our supervisor Quinn. He's going to do the operations update.
Afternoon, everybody. Just for the record, Tyrone's been wearing a hat all week, so I wasn't aware of atomic blue, or else I would have gone atomic blue in solidarity today. But yeah, just here for the operations update. It's been a little while, I think, since our last one was December, I think. So have a little bit to go over of what we've been doing and some of the major repairs and issues that we've come across for the last 6 months. We'll start off, go over the staffing, what's been going on in our department and what we kind of have coming down the line in terms of staffing and resources. And then I'll touch on just the operational updates, like I said, some of the major problems and things that we've been working on. And then what's coming down the line for us. And then if you have any questions throughout, I guess I can answer them like Tyrone, but at the end we can have a little Q&A if you need. So staffing wise, one of our operators, our longtime operators, Darren Robinson, he's been with us for 17 years, I think. He's retiring in October. So Darren's been kind of our wastewater guru for quite some time. Between him, Ken and Dale, our 3 older operators, I think they started 06, 07, 08. So they're all kind of slowly in line to ride off into the sunset here, so to speak. So congrats to, there we go. Congrats to Darren. And then second, we got Al Midgley. Al is our contractor in Loon Lake. He's been helping us out for quite a while, looking after the Loon Lake water system. So I think this is his last week working for us. Yeah, I was talking to one of the residents the other day. They're getting a little gift together for Al. And he told me a little story about, he just does everything. There was a car accident one day on the highway and he pulled up, and who was the flagger directing everything was Al, looking after it. So yeah, he's a man of many hats out that way. So he'll be missed. Casual laborers, we have 2 casual laborers, former City of Kamloops utility workers that are still around for us. Yeah, they come in handy. Usually one of the 2 are available when we're in a pinch, staffing wise, or we have an emergency. They're ready to go for us. So that's nice. We had a few expected staff leaves over the course of the year so far. Some family emergencies, some medical emergencies. Then we have a knee surgery coming up. So it's a little bit of a revolving door. Just trying to keep the staffing levels up, but like I said, with our casual laborers and the new guys, we're doing pretty good. And then our recent hires from last year, the 2 new guys, Corey Scott's been really good, working well with us. He's kind of more analytical side, taking care of the treatment plants, and Pritchard, and then Stu Crawford. I know Stu's mentioned he tunes into these presentations. So Stu, if you're watching, keep up the good work. But yeah, Stu's been great getting in the excavations and the digs with Dale and learning, and yeah, he doesn't hesitate to get in there. So staffing wise, we're doing all right. Moving on operationally. So this is from about last December to date. We'll start off in Maple Mission. So these are our new chlorine and turbidity analyzers. The little gray box on the left, that's our Kunze chlorine and pH analyzer, and then the black unit on the right is our turbidity analyzers. So not only Maple Mission, but for all of our systems, we've installed these. Before, we kind of had a little bit of a mix and match of analyzers throughout, so it is nice now that we have standardized analyzers across. All our operators just need to know one manual and one setup, so it's coming in handy. And then this is our pressure reducing valve in Maple Mission in the middle of the system. I ordered a new one. It came in yesterday. So this is the existing 3-inch PRV in there right now. And I think it's due for a service. It's failing a little bit. So we're going to go out there and swap the new one in, and then we'll pull that one out and repair that and have it on the shelf. And then we'll most likely do a every 2 years swap out and tune up the old one. So that will get fixed soon. Moving on to Pritchard, springtime leak repairs. Obviously, in the springtime, the ice is thawing, the ground's thawing, and things start to break and snap. Pritchard was a hot area for us this spring. Our operators driving around doing their checks, and you can tell when there's a pool of water or a big patch of ice on the ground that wasn't there previously. You kind of know something's going on. So this was one that we found on Bostock Crescent. We dug down, the service saddle was old and decayed, so we just put a new one on there and a new connection, and then backfilled everything there. This was another one on Bostock, on the other side of Bostock. This was with the help of a hydrovac. As you can tell, it's a little more of a precise dig, just due to the fact that we had 2 meter pits side by side. We couldn't really get our equipment in there to get down to the repair. It was another leaking connection, just old connection to the house. So yeah, that one got fixed up and buried as well. And then this also was Bostock Crescent. So it was a big, busy time on Bostock this spring. This was a resident's house. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but it's a bit of a skating rink. We got called by a neighbor about a large leak in the area. And we came out, and it ended up, I followed the running water. It was underneath the woman's trailer. So it was leaking quite significantly from the water line under her trailer down the road. So we shut the water off for her and got her in contact with a plumber and got everything fixed for her there. And then hydrant maintenance, we just completed the hydrant maintenance for the whole system. all going around and isolating each hydrant, pulling it apart, checking the O-rings, making sure everything's operational. So Pritchard has been checked off for the hydrant maintenance side of things. Savina, this was a fun one. This was Boxing Day. I got a call around 3 o'clock from our on-call operator that residents in Savina were telling us that there's water rushing across the road. So me and him were out there till about midnight trying to isolate the main line and stow the leak. And we eventually got it. And then the next day we came in and got all the troops together and the equipment and headed out there. We had to close the road off and start digging down. It was a pretty significant bit of a sinkhole there. We had the hydrovac on site to get all the water out and keep the water out so we could get down. And this is what we found. This is a service saddle that you could take your 2 fingers and pretty much wiggle it off of the water main by the time we got down there. So, yeah, that was a fun little holiday. But yeah, it was my first on-call experience as the supervisor, and it was pretty stressful, but everything went smoothly, and yeah, the guys performed well, so that was good. And then this was just a meter pit that we had to raise to grade for an address along Savina access. And then as we speak, the guys are out in Savina performing hydrant maintenance on the system in Savina as well. So Evergreen, this is our pump intake, our intake pump down along the North Thompson River at the Evergreen system. We'd been running on one pump for quite some time, so we ordered up a second one and dropped that down into the well there, and everything's been running smoothly ever since. So those pumps are alternating back and forth. We've had no issues. It is a bit of a tricky setup there since we go from the river under the train tracks, under the highway up to the reservoir. So it's good to have a bit of redundancy there now. And then leak repair. This was a recent one. We had a customer, a resident on Ronlin, complained about their yard was getting a little mushy and there was some soggy spots. So we went to investigate, and sure enough, there was a pretty significant leak happening in their yard. It was pretty intrusive. We had to pull a tree out and put it aside, and we got down. We found this was gushing out. You can't quite see it from here, but there's a little bit of a nick on the line. So when the contractors went through to install the meters, they used a crimping tool, it's called. So they crimp the tube, close it off, so you don't have to shut the water main on and off, on and off. And I think it was a little bit evident that just right where it was crimped, it just kind of wore down thin and busted a leak out. So that was a full day, and then we had our landscaping, we put our landscaping hats on and cleaned up the front yard for them, and they were quite pleased with, we put the tree back in as best we could and had everything wrapped up and cleaned up for them. Vavenby. I think I've spent more time in Vavenby this spring than I ever have in my life. Me and Phil Weber, the contractor. Phil's a good guy, but he messaged me the last time we were coming down. He said, "Quinn, you're a good guy and I appreciate your work, but I think we shouldn't see each other for a while." And I said, I agree with you on that one, Phil. So this was end of January. Tyrone called me on Saturday, said we have issues in Vavenby, the reservoir can't fill, and this is the pump house down by the river. It was also a giant skating rink. You can see the line. So the water comes from the river into a well, gets pumped through a 4-inch line through the pump house, out the pump house, and then up to the reservoir. And that's the discharge line on the left there. The line had pretty much sheared off from the flange coming out of the pump house, so there was water gushing up from the ground. We hit the road 6 a.m. Monday. Tyrone grabbed some parts and we managed to get down to the issue and jackhammered some concrete away and put a repair clamp and fixed everything up. So that was surprisingly smooth. yeah, I was expecting a longer day, but everything went very well that day. Then we installed a new check valve. This is inside that pump house. All of that piping and the blue check valve there you can see is all brand new. So there was a leak and a crack on that. So we repaired all that, all brand new, so that should be fine for quite some time now. Hopefully. And then this is a little more recent. You can see some green grass and blue skies, but this was a repair we had to do out front of a house in Vavenby. The main in Vavenby is 8 feet down, so it's a little bit trickier. But that was another full day hanging out in Vavenby fixing the line. But all generally went smoothly and they're all fixed, so yeah.
Quinn, I have a question. The one that was the main break, is that, that's the center picture with the yellow ladder, is that?
How do I do that?
Yeah,
This one right here?
that looks like it's below the frost line. So was it just the pipe or corroded or?
So this line here is a high density polyethylene. And then this is the 4-inch steel pipe coming out of the intake. So I'm assuming it might have just been worn down, or if it was the frost heave, that kind of, the HDPE just kind of sheared off from the steel, as far as I would know. I don't know if Tyrone can speak to that.
Yeah, what we typically don't see happened here. And the butt fused flange that attaches to the end of the blank HDPE pipe actually broke and sheared. So that, don't know how that happened, whether it was frost over years of moving and or pressure on off water hammer. But we saw the HDPE. What you can see in that picture on the right-hand side is the new flange adapter that then you use a coupling to connect to the HDPE. So the steel pipe itself and the flange on the steel side was fine. It was the HDPE, which when you weld HDPE is supposed to be the strongest part, stronger than the pipe itself. Wasn't the case in this point. But this infrastructure was also installed in the 70s. It's pretty old. They actually referred to it as Sclair back then because that was the only brand that offered HDPE. So interesting job, that one.
Moving on to Loon Lake, I mentioned Al Midgley's retirement. We took the casuals and some of our operators up there the other week to just kind of go for a full run through on the system and kind of the quirks of things that Al's found. And then we added a new pump. This is the existing submersible pump. So the Loon Lake system, the Loon Lake itself has a bit of a manganese, I wouldn't say problem, but it's just a naturally occurring mineral in the lake. So to piggyback the bottle fill station with Tyrone, I think you wouldn't really want to be drinking anything. It's not a health hazard, but it is not really aesthetically pleasing. So yeah. This is the wet well in Loon Lake. So we installed a secondary intake pump because the other one had died on us. So we have 2 pumps for the reservoir now. And we also went around with Al and did some flushing on the system. So we hook up to the fire hydrants and there's a dechlorinator on the end of it. And we open up the hydrants and do a good flush of the system in the spring and the fall. And I'm not sure if you can see, but on the end of the chlorinator, the water is a tinge brown. So you run it for 2 or 3 minutes and then everything starts to clear up after that. Blue River, this was another fun one. It was the end of February, I think, Friday night. We got a call, alarms were going off. The reservoir was low level and draining fast. And our contractor, Tom Onslow, and the former contractor, Don Turdiak, I think they went around, as far as I know, and pinpointed the problem. There was a hydrant that had cracked, and Blue River, obviously that time of year is quite snowy, but there was a significant wet and no snow area around this one fire hydrant. So it was quite easy to pinpoint. The line had broken and the reservoir had drained. So they managed to isolate that section of main and get the pumps back up and fill in the reservoir for the remaining community. But I wasn't available for this weekend, but Tyrone got a few of our operators on board Saturday morning and packed up the trailer and headed up there first thing to go patch together that water main. You can see the hydrant here is the culprit, and then they just disconnected and put in a piece to splice together the main and get everything back up and running. Yeah, that was an adventure. And then leak investigation. So sometimes when we get told about a leak, if it's downstream of our infrastructure, then it is the residents' issue. And then if it is our infrastructure going towards the main, then it's our problem to fix. So sometimes we have to go do a little investigation to determine what is going on. And this was a Blue River job. That's Stu there in the excavator and helping out. But yeah, that's just another dig we did. It's good to get him some time in the machine because Dale mentioned to me today he's got a year and 9 months. So it's not like he's counting down the days or anything. This was Wallachine, so I'm not sure who is all familiar with the Wallachine setup. So this is the community up along the South Thompson River here, and this first red dot is our reservoir. So as of right now, pump house along the river pumps up to the reservoir and then drains down to our treatment building and then out towards the community. As far as I'm aware, before the pump house was installed, there's some infrastructure built up here that's called Jimmy's Creek. And there's a water main that runs from that down to the reservoir, and it hadn't been maintained for a little while. So we went up there and we nicknamed it the Raptor Pen because looked like Jurassic Park when we went up there. The weeds were about head high. And we got some of the guys up there with some tools and equipment, and we managed to just clear the whole area out and get the dam and everything cleared up. Just in case in an emergency situation, we can turn that on. But yeah, that was a full week's worth of work of clearing brush and moving material to try and get access back to Jimmy's Creek. On the sewer side of things, we just have the Pritchard line flushing and lift station cleaning. So I talked to Tyrone about doing a sewer line cleaning in Pritchard, and I guess it had been mentioned a year or two ago, and it was just too pricey. So we decided to split it up into thirds and start with a third of Pritchard each year. So we managed to flush the 1/3 and get a bit of camera work done to see what the main looks like. Everything looked good and the cleaning went well, and this is them. This is the lift station. So all the sewer gravity feeds to this lift station, which then gets pumped to the wastewater treatment plant. They did a pretty good job of cleaning out that lift station. The operator, we did a confined space entry, and he jumped down there and you could hear rocks and you name it flying up the hose. But yeah, it was pretty spotless by the time he was done. So that was helpful to our system and to our treatment plant. That's it for the 6 months. What is coming down the line for us? We've talked about the Blue River water main install. There's a section of main that we have to figure out a time on the schedule and get our resources together to head up there and get that figured out. As well as Wallachine, there's a little stub of water main that needs to be installed. We're looking to complete all of the hydrant maintenance. We're on our way. We're about halfway done, so we still have a few communities to hit, but some of the places I've been told by our guys seems like it's been a couple of years since it's been done, so it's in progress. And then Savannah Reservoir cell cleaning. There's 2 cells to the Savannah Reservoir. We turn both of them on in the summertime and we turn one off in the winter and just run off one. So we're looking to clean one this year and then next year most likely get to the second one. As far as wastewater systems, there's a rotating biological contactor in Paul Lake. I talked with Tyrone about this. It's a bit of a tricky one because Paul Lake in the summertime 'cause obviously everybody's at the lake and it's peak flows, so can't really shut down any major infrastructure during that time. And then in the winter time, the biology and the microbiology of everything isn't working as well because it's so cold that you can't install something new that needs warmth and some growth happening on it. So we're looking at the shoulder season in the fall. We're gonna have to figure out a time to try and get that put in. And then the next third of our Pritchard flushing that I just mentioned, we'll keep working away on that. And then our Paul Lake septic pumping campaign. It's on a 5-year rotation, so we will figure out what addresses we need to get in line for that and get those pumped out. As far as the operational update goes, I think that's it for this year to date. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Director Hansel.
Thank you. Thank you, Quinn, for the update. I, first of all, would like to thank the team for the work that they put into Blue River and coming up there. You guys always respond in a very timely manner and it's appreciated by my community. My question is the fire hydrant that had the break, has that been repaired or is it scheduled to be repaired?
Me? Yeah, I'll take that one. We will reinstate that hydrant and that's part of the water main replacement that we're going to do that Quinn mentioned. So we're just trying to figure out which section, there's a couple of sections of water main that are pretty high priority in Blue River right now. Trying to figure out which one we can get to this year and reinstate that hydrant.
And supplemental. The other question, and I know that I've mentioned it before, but is there any form of grant opportunity to help the community of Blue River for these water main repairs? Because I know the cost is so significant for the repair and it's essentially going to empty the bank account. What will happen when we run into another break that's just down the line, which will come?
Right now, our strategy, I guess you could call it, for lack of a better term, is to repair them as they pop up and continue seeking funding opportunities to replace the assets that are aging out. So there is, as far as prioritizing, let Jamie maybe speak to that as far as prioritizing grants.
Yeah, I would say that segues into the next presentation when we'll talk about grants and the challenge that we have that, yes, there's grant opportunities there and there's multiple projects and priorities. So that's to come, that discussion.
Director Thorpe and then Director Houghton online.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. Thank you for Wallachine, for cleaning out Jimmy's Creek. I got an update from Jamie before I went out there and he said that the intake had been cleaned. I had no idea that was quite that bad. So thank you. I appreciate that. Second question, when you were talking about the fire hydrant maintenance, does that include places like Spence's Bridge where it's more a case of flushing out the system? Because that was a question that came up with them, please.
Yep, we have, I think next week, we're heading out to Spence's Bridge, so we have a few weeks. It's not something that I can pinpoint when it will be done, because it's just kind of a week by week, see how quickly the guys can get things buttoned up and how much maintenance there needs to be done. So yeah, Spence's Bridge is this month coming up. Yeah.
Director Houghton online.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I lost internet connection, so I lost part of your presentation, but Del Oro, I think I probably missed that part of it. What are we doing with any kind of maintenance this year? And I know we had funded some money for groundwater testing and for an access up to the reservoir. Can you just give me a quick update on Del Oro? And I apologize on probably having to do it again, but I did lose internet, so.
Yeah, I can cover that. So with Del Oro, with the groundwater exploration program, we are looking at doing a desktop study to identify areas that are suitable to drill a well to access groundwater. And then the second stage, once we identify those areas and a high probability of accessing groundwater, we will drill a test well pump test it and sample the water quality to determine suitability to connect it to the community water system. One of the projects that I didn't mention in the update in the report was the reservoir access for Del Oro community, which we currently lack access other than foot access up a very steep bank in the existing right of way. So one of the grant funded projects we have is to examine an alternate route from the original route to that reservoir. And the intent would be to design that for an all-terrain or utility terrain vehicle, like a side-by-side or a quad, in order to access that reservoir with the equipment required to perform maintenance on it.
So supplemental, there's no quality or quantity projects slated for 25 or 26 to get them more or better water other than groundwater testing?
That's correct. The groundwater exploration will come first, and that will then inform any future projects for Del Oro as far as water quality goes. Currently, we don't see an issue with water quantity for Del Oro.
Okay, and just last supplemental, your hair color might be due to driving your new Ford Lightning up and down the highway, so maybe that's got something to do with it. Thanks, Tyrone.
I was waiting for you to be here. I was going to make that joke myself. Thanks, though.
Director Morris.
Oh, thank you. Just three summary quickly questions. So Evergreen, you're feeling that this next step with some CCBF funding will solve some of the other problems that have been there. Is that correct? I mean, comfort level is what I'm looking for here.
I have zero comfort with anything in the utilities. But as far as the intent of the groundwater project in Evergreen is two things. One is the access to the existing intake. So that is problematic. The second piece is the water quality, in which we essentially have surface water that we are unable to treat and meet the IHA guidelines. So groundwater within the community will not pose an access issue. We won't put it somewhere that we can't get to it. And then the other intent of the groundwater project is to find a source that is suitable for drinking water with minimal treatment. So we need to wait on that project to complete before we have an answer and a comfort level of where it's at. And basically phase one will give us a comfort level of accessing groundwater.
So just supplemental just to that one. A few years ago, I recall a conversation about a possible option of connecting the Evergreen into the city, a city system that was close to the Heffley Creek Hall. I assume that has simply died as an option. Is that right?
The Evergreen Community System is on the boundary of the City of Kamloops, and the City of Kamloops doesn't have any water infrastructure out that far. The Rayleigh Waterworks and the Heffley Creek Waterworks are the nearest ones, but those are private utilities within the City of Kamloops. So.
Thank you. Okay, then, fair enough, just checking again for those folks. Pritchard, Bostock Road, just the timing in a sense of where we think we might be with that, and then I'll only have one more question.
Can you expand more on the Bostock question?
It was just that it was mentioned that there has been a break of some kind, and I had heard a bit about that. So is that conversation that's happening, or is it something that actually occurred?
We had multiple breaks on Bostock this year, and they've all been repaired.
Oh, and the third one is just a question with Paul Lake then. That's primarily a septic system, correct? And are we managing that particular project? It came up as a question, apparently.
Yeah, so the Paul Lake Community Wastewater System was put in place to collect all the septic tank effluent from each of the properties and then push that or pump that to a centralized wastewater treatment facility where we treat that and then dispose of it subsurface. And that we do manage that system. And as part of the service establishment bylaw, we are also responsible for the pumping out of the septic tanks for the individuals. And that is what Quinn was referring to with the septic tank pumping campaign in Paul Lake, is that we will pump the sludge out of those tanks, and we have it in a 5-year rotation. And we're back on year 1 this year.
I have a question or comment, I guess. Mr. Vieira, we have all of these long-serving employees in the water utilities and sewer utilities services, and this board is getting the reports on all of that. And we'd certainly like to express our appreciation as a board, as a committee, to these folks for helping us out. And I wonder, I know we have, every year we have a long service award. I don't know if these folks get in to those meetings. I don't recall, but somehow it would be nice if we could recognize their service, particularly the fellow in Loon Lake who, have we got a replacement for him? So I do would like to express on behalf of this committee our appreciation for all those years of service.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good comment. Yes, for our internal staff, we have the long service awards, but we'll take that under advisement in terms of a mechanism to recognize, longer serving contractors who are just as important and act as staff out there in those communities.
Any other questions? Maybe we should have a break. 5-10 minute break, and then we'll get into the next topic. Do we have enough time for that? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Everybody ready? Good stuff. Okay, Mr. Vieira, thank you.
All right, so on to the final report on the agenda. It's gonna just flash up here. I just got a short PowerPoint presentation. Ainsley, our grants coordinator, who I think you all know and have met, is joining us here as well. So basically this presentation is, and this discussion is kind of a follow-up / update to the March meeting where we talked about the kind of hypothetical, theoretical scenario of grant opportunities that might come our way soon, which we kind of suspected were going to be announced. So our little birdie was in the know. And then, so March 20th of this year, or of last month, the Building Strategic Priorities Fund grant was announced. And so that is under the Canada Community Building Fund umbrella, if you will. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule, but it seems to get announced about every 3 or 4 years of different intakes. So the idea of it, different than the Canada Community Building Fund, the gas tax fund that's on an annual basis. This is one-time announcement, a one-time intake for major large-scale capacity building projects. And this is straight from the guide, large-scale projects that align with national objectives, which are productivity and economic growth, a clean environment, and strong cities and communities. So as I mentioned at this committee back in March, we were trying to prepare for this, knowing that once it gets announced, it's a very quick turnaround. So September 12th is the deadline for submitting the application. And from what I understand, this is actually a little bit of a longer turnaround just because it coincides over the summer break, but that's still not a lot of time for us to get our ducks in a row here. So yeah, we're having this discussion here at the committee level, and then as I'll talk about in a minute, it's going to go to the board next to give us direction on where to move. So a little bit more about the fund, and Ainsley will jump in if I say anything wrong or if you guys stump me on any questions. So good news, it's up to 100% eligible cost. So it's not a percentage funding like some other grant opportunities. The maximum allowable amount is $7 million per project. The total cap is $125 million province-wide. 119 of that is under their capacity building. So that's the capital side that we would be applying for any utility-related projects. And the application limits, municipalities and regional districts are treated a little bit different. Regional districts can put up to 4 applications. Only 3 of them can be capital. So I won't go into detail in here. I know I sent a link to the announcement, which also has a link to the detailed application guide. But just for context of this discussion, and as we move to the board discussion in July around this, we as staff are thinking about the evaluation criteria, and when we consider different projects and recommending the board apply for those projects for this fund, we're thinking about, well, what's the likelihood of success? How is it going to fall under their evaluation criteria? So there's a lot of different things in there, but yeah, just kind of putting that in context. They give us a lot of information, a fairly good guide about how they're going to evaluate, and so then we can work backwards when we consider different projects to see where it's going to land. So then, as we talked about in March, this is my slide that I just copied and pasted from the March meeting, or the one slide from the March meeting. The discussion was around if there was, which now there is, a large grant intake, what capital project within the utilities world would the utilities committee support as a priority? We're referencing our sustainability and acquisition policy here, that the TNRD will prioritize the greatest initiatives that are the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. And if you remember, we talked about, the kind of the 2 biggest systems. Well, second biggest one needing water treatment is Vavenby, and the first biggest one being Savinaw. And we talked about them both being in need, but ultimately this committee agreed that Salvina should be prioritized for all those reasons discussed, that the water quality was even poorer there in terms of more boil water notices, and there's a greater number of residents there that would benefit from a water treatment plant. So reminder of the numbers. So this is kind of a depressing table with how things escalated. So a reminder that with these grant intakes, since the turnaround's so quick, we need to have shelf-ready projects. So the good news is the Savinaw plant is a shelf-ready project in the sense that we already have a preliminary design costing estimate that was completed with grant funds back in 2020, which was just under $9 million of the estimate. So just prior to the earlier this year, we did an updated cost estimate based on today's costing, and that's now over $12 million for the full scope of what was in the preliminary design. But what we anticipating questions of the board and this committee, we went back to our engineers and said, so what if we did absolutely the bare minimum work to get clean water flowing through the pipes in Savinaw? And so they looked at it and cut out a bunch of nice to haves, which we'll talk about a little bit. There's a lot of things that are very nice to have, arguably that we should have, but at the end of the day, we could take about $2 million out of it, and then those other nice to have things could be added if there was additional funding or at a later date. So that brought the total down to about $10 million. So the reason we wanted to get that kind of the absolute kind of minimum cost is that if we submit a grant application, or if the board supports the Savinaw water treatment plant under this fund intake, we want to make sure one of the things that would strengthen our application is that we could show it's fully funded. You know, for example, if we say, well, we want $7 million and the remaining $5 million, we're going to go to public assent and hope they approve it, we won't have public assent done in time for that September deadline. So it will definitely weaken our application. If we say we want $7 million and we have this other money in reserves or these other grants like CCBF that we would apply to it, that it would be fully funded, that's a stronger application. So I mentioned the reduced scope. So one of the examples in that reduced scope is we need to recognize that if we're going to that lower cost, we do have increased operating costs. So just for example, our operating costs would increase about $100,000 a year simply by hauling the wastewater off the site instead of building the infiltration bed at the site for about $700,000. So the reason I'm mentioning that is that under the ideal scenario, we want to have the full funding for that full scope. So that middle column is really where we want to end up to do it properly. But the right hand $10 million is an option if we need to do the bare minimum. So potential funding sources. So let's walk through this. So Strategic Priorities Fund, that's the opening that we're talking about now that we need to submit an application by the September 12th. So the maximum amount there is $7 million. We had mentioned in the last meeting in March about the Growing Communities Fund. So that is, I always refer to what Director Houghton first called this fund, the David Eby bucks, which was the one-time payment to all local governments. We received about $5.5 million back in 2023, I think 2022, through that fund. Since then, we have allocated about half of it to projects in the Pritchard Water Treatment Plant, as well as the Wallachine Reservoir. So there's $2.5 million remaining. That would need board approval to allocate to any specific project. But just a reminder, the TNRD board did kind of prioritize TNRD infrastructure and with a focus on utility systems for consideration of using that fund in the future. Canada Community Building Fund, so gas tax, a bit of a correction from what we presented back in March. We did get confirmation from UBCM that administers this fund, that we can use the CCBF fund and stack that with the Strategic Priorities Fund. I mistakenly said back in March that we couldn't stack those, but it's our understanding that we can. So we can use that additional funding. Probably Director Grenier and I can jump into the details on this around the allocation of the Area J funding. But currently there is, well, as of 3 days ago, there was only about $20,000 unallocated in Area J, but 400,000 of that was allocated to a Cherry Creek Fire Hall referendum, which was not successful. So technically, there's $420,000 that's presently unallocated, that's allocated to Area J. Plus, considering the construction wouldn't actually start until at least 2027, we can count on the next 2 years of gas tax funding also coming in for Area J, which is an additional $180,000. The final funding source is borrowing. Borrowing's always an option. It requires public assent. So for discussion purposes here, I put up to $2 million. That would bring us up to getting that full 12 million as needed if the public approved borrowing that 2 million. Just a note for consideration, the residents of Savannah are already paying borrowing fees through parcel tax for the reservoir project that happened about 12 years ago, about a dozen years ago. So I think this is my final slide. This is kind of where I throw it out there for discussion, but here's my 2 bits of things that I think this committee should discuss and consider, and that will be also a consideration at the board level. Ainsley and I in Austin all attended a UBCM session specifically about this grant intake. So we were able to ask some more specific questions, and they went into a little more detail about it. And one thing they made clear is that even though it doesn't say this in the guide, they said the higher that dollar ask, the lower the likelihood of success. So it's only $119,000 available, sorry, $119 million available across the entire province. Now, Metro Vancouver is excluded, but everyone else is going to be submitting. Every other regional district and municipality will likely be submitting a grant application. So there's going to be a lot of competition. So if we're asking for the whole 7 million, we're asking for almost 6% of that pot of money. So now this is where I go back to Director Onslow's comment about grant funding. Yes, are there other TNRD capital projects that are also eligible? Absolutely. There's a long list of projects in our capital plan that would be eligible. So not just utility related projects, but other non-utility related projects. And arguably that'll be a broader regional benefit. For example, if we talk about a project in a library capital project or a solid waste project, something that has more taxpayers that would benefit from it. And also there's other capital projects that are lower cost. So back to the first point, there's other capital projects we can ask for $1 or $2 million for that maybe have a higher likelihood of success because we're not asking for the full maximum amount. But all that said, and I'm sure there's lots of discussion around that point, but all that said, I also want to remind this committee, and we'll be reminding the board of this, is these large scale grants are the only opportunity for these major utility upgrades. So some of those other capital projects in the TNRD capital plan, not all of them, but many of them have other options. For example, if there's a larger tax base that would benefit, that also means there's a ability to have reserve funds or increased taxation without significant impact. We know because we've gone through the numbers before in any of the utility systems, doesn't matter how much we increase rates, we're not going to be able to put aside $12 million for a water treatment plant when we only have 300 people paying into it. Or we can put it that way, but it's going to take 40 years to do it. So that's going to be a discussion point and a consideration for the board. And we've been we've been saying to the TNRD board for many cycles, for the last 15, 20 years, that these major projects, the only way can ever happen is through grants. I commend this committee and subsequently the board for putting in aggressive rate structures, which we want to be able to properly operate our systems and fund replacement of existing assets. But still, our rate structure comes nowhere close of actually funding these new additional projects to make an improvement to the existing system. Another point of consideration is that I mentioned at the first slide or second slide, multiple applications are allowed. So we could apply for 3 different projects in the TNRD or even 3 different utilities projects. But something that we heard from the UBCM staff that administer this program is, keep in mind you will be competing against yourself if you submit multiple projects. Or in other cases, you could submit for multiple projects that add up to the total $7 million. But applying for 3 different projects that are, let's say, $7 million, we're just competing with ourselves on that. And related to that, these applications aren't easy. This is significant staff time and time with our engineering consultant to actually put together a robust application. The time we put in and the work and the detail we put in the application will help increase our chances of success. So I guess that's my long-winded way of saying I think our staff recommendation that's going to be coming to the board is that in this case, let's put all our eggs in one basket and decide on what the priority project is and focus on that in the application. So sorry, I lied. This is my last slide. So what does that mean for next steps? So the next step is it needs to go to the board to actually approve or prioritize what project that we're going to apply for. This presentation has been my way of essentially saying that our intent from a staff perspective is to recommend applying for the Savinaw Water Treatment Plant based on the previous discussion at this committee, and I guess we'll see where the discussion goes today. So that'll be a board report that we're planning to bring to the July meeting. And so we'll have more details in that report, but we haven't had time to crunch all those numbers to bring it to this committee yet. So I'm kind of just giving you the heads up what you'll be seeing in that report. So we'll be highlighting in that report the need. Why are we recommending the Savinaw Water Treatment Plant and why is it a priority compared to other projects? We will have discussion around other eligible TNRD projects and other funding options for those projects. So the board needs to be aware that if they're deciding on Savinaw, it means they're not prioritizing other projects in the capital plan. And then some discussion around what the financial implications are. So both the other funding sources that we need to secure to do at the minimum, the $10 million or up to the $12 million. So around other funding options, growing communities fund, gas tax, and borrowing. Also, what does it mean for the future rate structure in Savinaw? Because part of their evaluation criteria is wanting to make sure we have proper asset management in place, which we're working towards. So that means there needs to be consideration for future replacement and operating costs. If we're applying for a grant to replace or to build a new plant, we should also be planning to maintain it, operate it, and ultimately replace it. And there'll also be some discussion around what is the likelihood of success. So essentially what I've been talking about here today, the board needs to be aware of the kind of all our eggs in one basket scenario. So I will leave it at that and put it back to the chair to discuss.
Okay, questions? Dr. Sal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about the Vavenby system. If I remember correctly, last time we discussed this about the strategic grant funding, it was slightly lower than Savinaw, and now that we're talking about it, like the cost and the limit of $7 million, I just wonder if Vavenby would be closer to that. With respect to Director Grenier, I'm not trying to jockey for priority. That's one question. I got another follow-up.
So yes, that is a good question. And so to specifically answer it, the Vavenby number is around 7.5 million opposed to the $12 million there in the middle. So 7.5 million for Vavenby, 12.5 million for Savinaw. So with this slide, my intent was to show that we can, if we cobble together all these funding sources, we could put together an application that shows that we have enough funding to build the basic $10 million plant in Savinaw. So fully funded if the board approved, using the Growing Communities Fund and the remaining community benefit, community building fund from Area J. And then subsequently, we would go to the community to borrow, approve, let's say $2 million to fund the full 12.5 million. So back to Vavenby, 7.5 million. Yes, it's 7.5 million opposed to 12 million. So we could apply for a lower amount or the full amount to fund it, or apply for a lower amount on the Strategic Priorities Fund and go to the board and ask to allocate the Growing Communities Fund as well. So we lessen the ask on the Strategic Priorities Fund. This is the reason we brought kind of this discussion up to the committee back in March, is there's a lot of different avenues we can go here. But back to, the initial, here we go. Yeah, the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. Savinaw does fit that if we're talking just within the realm of the utilities. But back to you guys for discussion on that topic.
I think you had a second question too. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jamie, for that. And then the second question is, just talking to some folks in Vavenby, this plant, ever since I got into office, it's been a topic. And one of the issues was, I have heard that, be careful what you ask for. And I noticed one of your last slide there, staff will be looking to that. When can we get some numbers on the increased operating cost? Like, obviously, if they get the water treatment plant, then the service taxation is going to go up to maintain that facility. I just hope that residents don't, or Vavenby or Savinaw, once they get the facility, they don't regret it. Oh, I didn't know it's going to cost me extra $500 a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So we're going to include some discussion around that, but I want to be clear that the decision to apply for this funding won't automatically be the decision to increase the utility rates by X amount. But what you're going to see in that report, which Sarah and I were talking about, that maybe he can jump in as well, is we want to try to give the board some understanding of, if we have a new asset worth $10 million, under our current model where we're trying to fund 10% of the replacement value within 10 years, this is the impact in terms of percentage increase it would have to the utility rates.
I can add to that a little bit. So in the case of Savinaw, building a new filtration facility there would essentially replace existing infrastructure that's already on the books to be replaced. So the intake there would be replaced by this facility. So doing the math and the scenarios on that, and how building a facility is not adding $12 million worth of infrastructure. It's replacing existing infrastructure. So renewing that back to, zero or 100%, and what implications that would be. In the case of Savinaw, where there's currently a 15% year-over-year increase in order to cover the infrastructure deficit, today's infrastructure deficit in 10 years from now will cover today's costs. The biggest impact on the operations side will be less contribution to reserve. We'll still have adequate, most likely have adequate operating budget to operate the system. It'll just be putting less away. In the case of Vavenby, where we went with a 4% to match inflation, which inflation exceeded, we're already behind the 8 ball on that one. So if we were to add a plant there, and if it came with increased operating costs, then we would probably it'd be a bit more urgent to adjust the rates there. But in Savinaw, we want to show, and whichever way the committee and the board want to go, we'll show what the impacts would be to plan for the asset renewal of the new asset and take into account any existing assets that are being replaced by the new asset. So it's going to be a pretty big report for you.
Director Houghton.
Yes, Jamie, are you looking for a vote here to take one particular option forward to the board, like say the Savanaw? Do you want to us to vote on that here, or just you're gonna make a report and take the whole thing to the board?
Yeah, thanks for that, Director Houghton. And you kind of called out something that I was thinking about ahead of this meeting, and I didn't put a recommendation here because I feel like we're not providing you with all the same information that will be provided to the board. So if the committee wants to make a recommendation based on the information that I've provided, they can. But also if you want to wait for more detailed information in the board report, that's, and have that discussion at the board table, that's fine too. It's not needed that this committee make a recommendation.
Well, if you feel that with analyzing all the different systems and this funding opportunity, if you think this is the one that best aligns with it, then I would be prepared to make a motion that we get behind you and go with the Savanaw treatment plant one at this time, if you think that is in the best interest of the whole TNRD.
Yeah, I put that back to the chair. Again, we're not making a recommendation, but if the committee wants to come up
Okay.
with a recommendation, that's
I just simply
totally
say,
appropriate.
Director Houghton, I think we want to have some more conversation at this utility
Okay.
committee right now. And then I'll circle back after everybody's asked their questions to see if that's something that they want to proceed. But I think unless you have a supplemental, Director Thorpe has a question.
Thank you, Chair. So I read that report very quickly, kind of the conditions of the grant, and I had a brief discussion with you and a brief discussion with the chair here. So I have a couple questions, and some of them kind of got answered. So what would be the likelihood of Savannah, like say that particular water system versus something that might be more regional, say the next set of B trains that we're going to need or regional parks? I mean, how would that weigh against one another? It said there that we can put in more than one project. Does this decrease the likelihood of all the projects that we might potentially be applying for? Or would it just be that we're competing with project to project versus decreasing our whole likelihood? And the next question is, if we pick the, just looking at the Savanaw water system, if we don't do the full mill deal, like the $12 million project, it said there that it would be $100,000 per year increase in operating costs. That works out to about $350 a household, just kind of rough guesstimate. So is that something that would kind of put us behind the 8 ball and not look so good in the fact that we're going to increase operational costs? And then last question, sorry about all of this. The 2 million would bring us up to that 12 million mark. Now, would we have to have that approved by Savanaw residents before the application was submitted? There, that's it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go in backwards order because I probably won't remember them, but I'll add to that the last one first. So no, the $2 million would not need to be approved before the application. And so the idea is that strategically we could submit an application for a project that's estimated at $10.3 million that could be fully funded through if that grant's successful, and through other grant funds if the board approves all that without borrowing. And then if we're successful in getting all of those grants approved, then we would go to the public and seek public assent for the borrowing to do the complete project. So therefore, even if the public assent failed, we can still build the plant that we applied for, although it would have impact to operating costs. So back to the $100,000 example that you brought up, yes, that would be exactly the type of scenario that we would bring to the public. We would say, again, this is all theoretical, but this is good discussion. We would say to the public, we have enough dollars, we have $10 million to build the basic water treatment plant to get you clean water. But these are all the things that we don't have funding for. One of the major ones being we have an additional $100,000 a year we need to make up through user fees because we don't have enough capital to do these other nice to haves. Or we can eliminate those additional fees by approved borrowing. So again, hypothetically, we say the $2 million, but there's pieces of that of what we can add and take out. Maybe the thing to save us $100,000 a year would cost $750,000. So maybe we just say we could borrow $750,000 to avoid that $100,000 a year operating cost, which makes sense. I think most people would support that. But anyway, without getting into too much detail, that would be the process. Get the money to build the basics, then go to the public to ask approval to fund the rest. That was the last two, so.
Would the funder look at this increase to operation costs? So would that be a detriment?
I mean, this is crystal ball stuff. I don't know. I'm confident that we could write a good application that would explain our process and that we can explain, hey, we've thought about this. Here's our plan. We can secure enough funds to build the basics. We would go to the public for public assent and have a reasonable level of confidence that they would approve it so we can do the whole thing. Your other question was just around other projects and where would this fall? I mean, that's back to the crystal ball. I'll let Ainsley chime in, but I brought up this evaluation criteria again. There's a lot of detail under each of these criteria. So, I mean, we could sit here and go through every different project and have a discussion around how we feel each of them would fall. So using the B trains example, well, how is having those B trains supporting housing? You know, I could make the argument or confidently make the argument that having clean water in an area like Savinaw that has potential for growth, but is limited because they don't have clean water, that could be more housing support than just having more efficient ways of hauling waste with the B trains. But back to climate resiliency, well, we're going to be, by having new B trains and being more efficient in hauling, we probably could make a better case for improving climate change for having B trains opposed to a new water system. So I don't know where to go with that, but those are all good comments.
No, I was thinking of it more as a regional because that would cover everything but, say, Kamloops, that or parks or, so that was my question. It would, something that was more regional have a better chance of success than something that, even though it impacts quite a number of residents, it's very concentrated in one
Yeah.
area.
So yes, so that's one of the 11 things there, the regional impact. And definitely this is not a large regional impact. We're having about 300 people or 300 properties that are benefiting from this. But again, back to the idea of these B trains, for example, are currently funded by reserve funds. So yeah, the second set would be funded through reserve funds is the intent. So there is other money there, but that's a discussion that the board's going to have to consider on here. The other piece, I'll just kind of share I guess it's my opinion on this. The challenge that we face as a regional district is going back to talking about regional impacts. So if Savinaw was its own village of 300, of 600 people, 500 people, they would be applying for this and the impact would be every single resident who lives on Savinaw is benefiting. But we as the regional district are submitting it. And so that's going to be the narrative if this is something that the board directs us to move forward on, that we have to make that case that this may not be benefiting everyone in the TNRD, but this community is benefiting and that community is its own entity. And maybe does Ainsley want to chime in? I've been rambling a bit, but her and I have been having a lot of discussion on this.
No, all I was going to add as far as the grant funding piece goes is we can really only control all of our pieces and putting together the best application. And it really comes down to what all of the other municipalities and regional districts are also applying for. So there have been other similar projects that have been approved in the past. We can't control a lot of these things, so we can just make the best case that we can for each one of those items, and we can make a case for all of them.
Director Hansel?
Whoop, last question. That one about the more than one project, does it decrease our likelihood overall or just compete one of our projects against the other? Thanks. Sorry for all the questions.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this.
So I'll say two things. So we asked that question to the UBCM staff and they specifically said, you will be competing against yourself. The other thing I'll say is that in 2022 at the last intake, was it 22 or 21?
2022.
Yeah, 2022, we applied and $6 million was the cap. We applied for 5 different projects under that $6 million and we got 0 of them.
I'm curious to know if we apply for the $7 million, is it all or nothing? Like, could they conceivably give us 5?
As far as I'm aware, they look at the full budget and cost of the project, and they won't give us less than we ask for. So it's all or nothing.
Director Sal?
Thank you, Chair. Could we get a list of the last 5 that we applied for and what they were? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can get the list off the top of my head. So it was a water main looping in Savinaw. So it wasn't the treatment plant, but it was some water mains that we had shelf ready at the time. It was a fire hall in Tobiano Cherry Creek. It was a library data system. Capacity building thing. What else was it? Oh, and Blue River water mains, the same one. What am I missing? Or maybe it was just.
The last one was the roof.
Oh, for the civic building. Yeah. So it all totaled up to the 6 million.
My question is, well, maybe it's not a question. I guess it's a statement. I would think that because we tried Savannah previously, it's a second time shot, which sometimes will give you a little bit more pull, because if it's the same group and they've already seen this come once, maybe this is the year to approve it for the people sitting looking at the grant. And as much as I love Vavenby, I think Savannah is maybe more needy at this point in time, even though it's more money. And you will still drive me to Victoria, right? It could be really, really ugly in the car, but anyway. I just think that right now, the world is really interested about global warming, drought, water problems, and I think that we probably have a better shot with that big project with more people, and it's already been requested once before, and they will have that information there.
Thank you for that. Is there any comment to that, Mr. Vieira?
No, maybe just one point of clarity. Even though Savinaw was in the previous grant application, it wasn't for the water treatment plant. It was for other in-ground infrastructure. So it was a utility system, but wasn't as sexy because it didn't have clean water. It was just, it wasn't going to improve the quality of water or the amount of water to anyone in the town. Just going to be less Boxing Day call-outs for Quinn.
I have a question. I think the plant was left at the altar on another application process. I know that during our meeting in Savinaw in 2022, I think Tyrone made a presentation and the question came up and we had applied for something and had been turned down. So this would be welcome news to the people of Savinaw if we could make this application. The second thing, along with Director Smith and Sal and myself, we're getting very good at not getting things through the public assent process. But having said that, I do think that there is a sentiment in Savinaw that they'd like to see this. And indeed, one of the community association people said to me, is there a possibility we could speed this up by contributing to the process? So I give that as feedback to the utility group. I think that that Mr. Vieira has, I guess, tested the mood, and I think something like that would be welcome. And then the other thing, if you're looking for a commitment from the area director, I certainly, I'm mindful that Director Morris threw everything in, plus the kitchen sink into the Pritchard water and sewer systems to cooper that thing together. I think that that was about a $10 million number, maybe even more. 12.7. So I would want the other directors to know that similarly, I would be very interested in applying available grant funds towards this very worthwhile project. It's a project that was certainly raised with me during my election. It was a want by that community, and I think that if we can bring it together, I would certainly appreciate that on behalf of the people in Savona. Director Houghton, is there anybody else that has any other thoughts or questions about this? Because I'm going to circle back to Director Houghton. Director Morris.
Thanks, and yes, we were one of the big, big access to a lot of those funds, but my question, and it's just possibly even just a due diligence question, but are there any other major projects, these large picture projects that are sitting there that we have not engaged any conversation in? Is there anything that we might be missing? I just want to be comfortable with that.
Director Vieira, or see.
So are you speaking within the context of utilities only or TNRD wide?
Major initiatives that would potentially come forward from somewhere throughout the TNRD. Obviously, the utility projects are the key that we're talking about right now.
So I guess I'll answer that by saying that we have limited shelf-ready projects, right? There's a lot of hypothetical projects that are out there, both in the utilities world that we've been talking about and other places, like I think we talked about, you know, this park strategy and developing a new park. Well, we don't have a shelf-ready project to spend 2 million or what, pick a number, $2 million on a new park or trail system because we're not at that point yet. So that might be 4 years from now when the next intake comes up. So there's a lot of those hypotheticals. I guess I go what we're going to be doing in more detail, which will bring up some examples when this comes to the board, is existing projects in the capital plan that could be eligible, like the B train project, for example. But clarifying the B train, because that's on tomorrow's agenda, we couldn't apply for the B trains that the motion is to purchase tomorrow. But we have 2 more replacement B trains in 4 years in the solid waste system that would be eligible. So that could be considered as a shelf ready one. Again, other big projects that aren't shelf ready is, you know, there's a plan for a library at Sun Peaks. That's a capital infrastructure that in theory is one that's in the capital plan, but not shelf ready for an application. Did that kind of answer? Yeah.
Director Houghton, did you want to make a motion, or what did you want to do?
Well, I don't, you know, if you think it will help at the board level, us pinpointing one item that is utility driven to use this money on, then I would do that. If that is the choice of the administration and of you folks, I would gladly make that motion that if we put a utilities suggestion to the board, then I'm hoping that the money will be spent on a utilities project. So I'd be willing to do that, yes.
Okay, seconded by Director Thorpe. And I don't think that I should vote on this motion. So I'm happy to call the motion.
Can I jump in? Can we get some clarification on what the motion is? Is the motion that okay. Okay, that the utilities committee support the
Sorry, Doug. That the Utilities Committee support the Savanaw Water System as a priority for the Strategic Priorities Fund. Too many
That is
priorities,
correct.
but
That's
Okay.
correct, Bridget.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to make sure it was clear.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and I want to make it clear I'm not going to vote on this, but I would like to open it up for questions on the motion on the floor. Director Sal.
Sorry, this is discussion about the motion. Okay, so I mean, being a public meeting, I do want to say to any Vavenby residents watching down the road, you know, we are here as board members, as committee members for the regional district, and you know, not as electoral area A, B, and et cetera. You know, who am I to argue with the logic? And thank you to staff for the very distinct, succinct, transparent figures, the maximum benefit, and the number of, subpar water quality days that Savannah was under, and, you know, comparing apples to apples. So I will be voting in favor of this.
Is there anyone else? Okay, I'll call the motion, and please note that I won't be voting in this. Director Smith? Okay. Okay.
I just want to interject for 1 second, if I may, Director Grenier, Chair. If you're declaring a conflict, you would need to step out. However, and I'm not providing legal advice here, if your conflict is simply that you're the area director, I believe that your interest is in alignment with the community. And so I'm not certain if there is a separate conflict of interest that is being declared.
Thank you for that. I don't have a conflict of interest on this treatment or anything, but I think it's only fair to my fellow directors when obviously Area J would be the beneficiary of it, that I would like to see some obviously strong support by other areas, because it is a TNRD, pan-TNRD funding that's being contemplated. So that's the rationale for that. As for me leaving, I'm quite happy to leave if you, under that scenario. I don't think I have a conflict. I just think it would be prudent not to be voting on something that is of such a size benefiting my area, if it were to pass.
So, yeah, just, I hear what you're saying, Chair Grenier, but our, what is our bylaw called? Our procedure bylaw states that if you're if you're not raising your hand, then it defaults as a vote in favor. So I appreciate where you're coming from, but technically, unless you're declaring a conflict and leaving, then you cannot abstain from voting.
Would it be possible if I leave and have Director Houghton administer this part of the meeting, and that way there would be no question that I wasn't involved?
Yeah, but if you're declaring a conflict, you need to declare what you're. Oh,
Sorry.
okay, sorry. I'll turn it back to Deputy Corporate Officer. I'll stop talking.
For clarity, so for those that can't hear Justin, he's simply correctly assessing that you could simply leave the meeting, will show that you've left the meeting. Your vote will not be recorded in this instance.
Okay, well, I will do exactly that.
And then we'll record you coming back.
Okay, so unless there's anything else to discuss about this, I will leave the meeting. And Director Houghton, you're there? You could please
Yes.
attend to this issue.
Okay.
Thank you for all that.
So all in favor of the motion put forward, that was put forward by myself and I believe seconded by Director Thorpe, could you raise your hands, and I'm going to verbally say yes. And I'll get the administration to count.
Yep, all in the room are raising their hands. All directors are in favor.
Okay, then I declare this motion passed. Thank you.
Okay,
And-
we're bringing Chair Grenier back in. All right, back to you, Chair. It's
All right, so that matter, I think, probably has been concluded, I imagine. So I guess we have, that's the end of that discussion about the grant funding. Is there any other questions coming up in our utilities committee that we should be addressing? No? Okay, having said that, I guess motion to adjourn, I guess, done. All right, this is adjourned. Thank you.